The House Government Operations Committee will come to order Monday, April the 11th. Clerk, please call the roll.
Representatives Byrd, Calfee, Camper, Cochran, Dixie, Faison, Johnson, Lafferty, Lamberth, Littleton, Rudder, Stewart, Warner, Vice Chairman Reedy, Chairman Reagan.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Members, do we have any personal orders? Seeing none, we will take up our calendar. We're going to go slightly out of order. Item number 2 on your calendar is going to be the actual first bill we hear. That's House Bill 2143, being carried by Chairman White. We have a motion and a second to hear the bill. Chairman White, I have amendments to put on your bill, so before you begin your explanation, I will pass the gavel to Chairman Faison. Chairman Faison, you have the gavel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have an amendment with the drafting code. Chairman Reagan, let me know if I've got this correct. 017241.
That is correct.
Properly motion second. Would you care to explain the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment cleans up the rule language in the bill, clarifying that the rules must be promulgated in accordance with the UAPA, as well as clarifying that the recommendations of the State Board of Education will be included in the filing of the rules when filed with the Secretary of State. I also want to state for the record that the Government Operations Committee interprets the review of the rules by the State Board of Education to be that of the final version of each rule to be filed, which is to say the State Board will see the rules as they are to be filed with the Secretary of State and make recommendations on that final version of the rules to be filed. With that explanation, Mr. Chair, I stand ready for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, you have heard the explanation of the amendment. Do we have questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, all in favor of adding amendment 017241 to House Bill 2143, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. Back to you, Chairman Reagan.
Thank you, Chairman Faison. The bill as amended is now before us. Chairman White, you're clear to give us an explanation of your bill.
Thank you very much, Chairman Reagan and committee.
Hang on just a second here. I failed to recognize a member. Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, before we get into debate, I'll make a motion for a positive recommendation.
We have a motion and a second for positive recommendation. Now, Chairman White, you're clear to explain your bill.
Thank you very much. And by the way, I fully support the amendment we just added. I think it's a great catch in the rulemaking authority so that when the rulemaking comes before the GovOps, that the recommendations from the State Board move right along. So excellent amendment, fully supportive of that. Members of the committee, bring before you House Bill 2143, which is known as TISA, stands for Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act. We are before you now. We have moved this bill out through Education Full as well as Education Sub. Let me just give you a brief, and then, Chairman, at any time you want to stop me for particular questions, I give you just a 50,000-foot view of what we're doing, if that's permissible.
Please, that's what we'd prefer.
Okay, members, what this particular bill does, we are looking at a new way of replacing our BEP formula that we've had for 30 years since 1992. This is how we fund K through 12 education. I have sat on the Education Committee now for 9 years, either in the capacity of sub-chair or full chair. And at this point, with 46 metrics in the BEP, I still cannot explain that to you. This is a system that goes student-centered in its funding, and I'm fully supportive of it. I really do like what I've been studying for the past 4 months in this particular bill. It has 3 goals: to support each student to read proficiently by 3rd grade. Item 2, the second thing, it prepares our high school students for post-secondary career and higher education, which we'll see. And then lastly, provide each student with resources needed to succeed regardless of their background. As this bill moves through, if it moves through the House and Senate and is passed, and then with the governor's approval, then this would include with it $1 billion new recurring dollars in our K through 12 funding. What I really do like about this particular piece of legislation, we go from 46 metrics. There's really 4 ways of funding. There is the base. The base is the minimum amount. Like if you were going to start up a school system, what would you need in order to start your school, such as teacher salaries, nurses, counselors, principals, RTI instructors, basic technology and school support staff. So there's a base. Every student that goes to every school within every district gets a base, and that amount is $6,860. Once the base, we go to what is a student-centered funding formula, and each student, the needs of the student has a certain weight. And so what that means is we add a percentage of the base onto the funding formula that, for each child. For example, you have one student weight will be if the students in that school are economically disadvantaged. And what that means, if they are homeless, foster, runaway, migrant students, or free and reduced lunch child, every child that fits in that category for that LEA, they get 25% of the base added onto their funding. And then you have things like concentrated poverty. That means that a student is a member of a school eligible for Title I school-wide. There's an extra 5% of the base for concentrated poverty. Small districts, an LEA that has 1,000 or less students, gets an extra 5% per student due to the sparsity. And then there's sparse districts, a county LEA with fewer than 25 students per square mile. It takes more to go pick these kids up on transportation, so they get an extra 5%. And lastly, in the student weights, you have unique learning needs. These are additional needs that a student may have, from dyslexia to a student that may stay at home because their unique needs where they're in wheelchairs and cannot come to school. And so they're each funded based on that. Besides that, the only other funding is the state is going to kick in direct funding. This will not come from the local match portion, but there will be a direct funding that's every student that's in K through 3 will receive an extra $500. And then also you have 4th grade literacy tutoring, and then you'll have CTE students. Every student currently gets about $4,500 CTE. We're going to raise it up $500 to about $5,000 per student for CTE. And then lastly, you have outcomes funding that subject to available funds. Districts that do very well in certain areas, such as 3rd grade reading or CTE, hitting CTE benchmarks, get extra funding. And then for those schools that are growing rapidly, fast growth districts, there's funding available there. So this basically, we're going to a system to where we know what each child is getting. And what I really like about this that we haven't been able to do before is that we know how much money a parent will be able to know exactly how much dollars their child is generating for that school. And they can hold the schools accountable for that in funding, as well as the General Assembly and the Department of Education. And with that 30,000-foot view, Mr. Chairman, I will leave it right there. We can have questions. We got the department here today to answer any questions also.
Thank you, Chairman White. And Chairman Byrd, you're on the list first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman White, how much was the BEP per student right now? How much is that? Do you
Chairman
know?
White.
I'm going to get a little help on that. I have forgotten that exact figure. Then this TISA form is 6,860. I think it's pretty close to what it is now. If I can get a shake of the head, I think that's the current BEP is about right. What the TISA 7,600 currently.
So it's actually, the base has actually gone down from the
So
BEP.
the base is a bit lower, but then the student weights moves it up.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Next on my list is Chairman Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I make a motion that we go out of session and hear from the administration?
Without objection, we are out of session. Department of Education, please come forward. All right, you know the drill. We are out of session. Please give us your name, your position, and what you represent, and then the members will have questions for you.
Penny Schwen, Commissioner of Education.
Sam Piercy, Deputy Commissioner.
Mary Ann Dursky, CFO.
Charlie Bufalino, Assistant Commissioner of Policy and Legislative Affairs.
Thank you. Representative Warner, you're cleared for your question.
Mr. Chairman, I have about 5 questions here. They're mainly yes or no answers.
Go for it.
And if I could just follow along here, appreciate it. Thank you, Department, for being here today, and I'm sure you've probably heard these questions numerous times. But I promised my constituents back home that I would ask these questions, and again, thank you for being here, and I'm sorry if you had to repeat yourself. First question, does this bill in any way fund charter schools ahead of regular public schools?
You're recognized.
So the only additional charter school funding is commensurate with the charter school facility grant that currently exists. So that is just a move from outside of the formula to inside of the formula. So
Follow-up
it is not
question?
an increase.
So basically, they would be the same, funded the same way.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct? All right. Will any of these funds be delegated to charter schools that public schools will not be eligible for?
You're recognized.
The only would be the charter school facility grant.
Okay.
Chairman Todd.
Does this bill in any way help promote school vouchers?
You're recognized.
No, sir.
Chairman Todd.
Is it in the administration's intent to
Warner.
is it in the administration's intent to let the student-based funds follow the student into private schools?
You're recognized.
No, sir, it is not.
Chairman Warner.
Can the department guarantee that the maintenance of effort for local LEAs will not increase?
You're recognized.
Maintenance of effort will be calculated in the same way that it is now. So it is a local decision in terms of how much additional funding they would want to put in. But there is nothing in the bill that would force that to increase outside of what would, unless they would have to increase for meeting their minimum requirements.
Chairman Warner, follow up.
Okay. Will this impact local funding after 5 years? We kind of just hit on that one, but your opinion, it will not affect unless they choose to make the choice.
You're recognized.
Yes, sir. So both the department and then the Sycamore Institute did two independent reviews on that. The department went through 2030, Sycamore Institute went through 2035. And what you will see is that in every district in the state, the line for the BEP increase is higher than that for TISA. So there should not be increases at the local at a rate that is, it would be a slower rate than what would happen under the BEP.
Okay.
Chairman Warner, you recognized.
Last question here. Are we as a legislative body giving up the ability to make rules by swapping from the BEP to this TISA funding?
You're recognized.
No, sir. In fact, under the new formula, we would actually have rulemaking, whereas under the BEP, there is not rulemaking. The department makes a number of decisions internally that do not go through any rulemaking process. We've added that rulemaking into this bill for public transparency and frankly, to ensure that it does have to go through the General Assembly before anything that would impact something as significant as school funding.
And the chair will add to that the amendment that was just put on it puts that rulemaking function under the UAPA requirements. Further follow-up, Chairman Warner?
I just want to thank you for coming today, and I'm sorry if you had to repeat yourself.
Not at all, sir. Thank you very much.
I think she's repeated herself several times in front of several education committees, so it's probably nothing new. Representative Stewart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, my understanding is that we've got a figure of $867 million that'll be spent on unique learning needs that are not defined in the current TISA amendment. My question is that approximately correct?
You're
And-
recognized.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then my follow-on question
You're recognized.
is, can't that money, the $867 million, can't that money be used to fund charter schools and/or vouchers for private schools?
You're recognized.
No, sir, that isn't permissible within the bill language. So unique learning needs are specific to public schools, and it would be determined by the needs of the individual students.
Follow-up, please.
So you're saying that the term public school as applied to unique learning needs does not include a charter school and does not include a private school funded with a school voucher. Is
You're
that what
recognized.
I'm understanding?
No, sir. So I think the way I interpreted your original question was, could unique learning need dollars be redistributed to those two entities? And the answer is no. The student generates the funding. That funding is specific only for public schools. That would include traditional public schools and public charter schools. It would not include private schools.
Representative Stewart, final follow-up, please.
Well, because that's what I'm following up on. I heard your testimony earlier today, and I thought you said this bill would not expand funding for charters, but what you just said, and I want to make sure I'm clear, is that as currently drafted, this bill could could involve effectively the transfer of over $800 million to charter schools based on the unique learning needs funding. In other words, all of that money, right, could flow to charter schools following the students.
You recognize.
Fair?
No, sir, apologies, that would not be accurate. So students in public schools would generate unique learning need funds. Those funds would be for students in traditional public schools and public charter schools. There is nothing in the bill that would move the entirety of unique learning needs to public charter schools. I don't see a scenario where that would occur.
Hang on
I
just a
might be
second.
misunderstanding.
Members of the audience, please silence your phones.
I'll do the same.
Members, please silence your phones. Representative,
whoever.
Representative Stewart.
I just want to admonish the people in the audience for their phones. Just so we're clear, I understand your testimony is that the structure of this bill has the money following the student. But what I'm saying is that there's nothing in this bill that prevents the transfer of the funding following the student, okay, as you describe it. The transfer of all $860+ million to charter schools. In other words, following the student, as you describe it, all of that money could end up in a charter school, a public charter school, or it could end up in a public school, traditional public school. Isn't that fair?
You're recognized.
So just so I can make sure I understand your hypothetical, and in your hypotheticals is the assumption that every student in the state is enrolled in a public charter school? Because that is the only scenario where all of the unique learning needs funding would be in a charter school. The bill is clear that every student in a traditional public school who qualifies for unique learning need would generate that funding, and that funding would remain in their traditional school or their public charter school. There is nothing in the bill that would allow the entirety of that fund to be allocated to charter schools unless you all made a change. And certainly I would defer to you all on that.
Well,
Representative Stewart, let me allow you one last question. We have others on the list.
Because I think I assume what people are worried about, I certainly am, is transfer of money out of the schools we have that exist today. And to me, what this bill seems to be doing is creating a pot of money, which over $800 million in the current bill, which could fund the movement of large numbers of students from the schools they're in now to public charter schools, and thus the transfer of the funds as well. In other words, as members are looking at this bill and they're seeing this figure for $867 million, they need to understand that all of that money, depending on all of that money, could move outside of the current schools that exist in their districts today and could move into charter schools, potentially newly created in those areas. Isn't that right?
You're recognized.
No, sir, it isn't. The only way that is accurate is, again, in a hypothetical where every single school in the state is a public charter school. I in no way think that that is possible or happening. So in this scenario, for unique learning needs, wherever the student is enrolled, they would generate that funding. There is no mechanism where that funding gets reallocated to anywhere else besides where that child is attending school. That is written into the bill. So right now, in the current reality of school systems in the state, if a child goes to a traditional public school and they have unique learning needs, they will generate funding, and that funding will stay at their traditional public school. If you have a charter, or if you have a student at a public charter school and that student generates funding, then the funding would be for that student in their public charter school. I think what's really important is that number you keep saying that I'm really excited about, which is over $860 million for students who need additional supports. Low-income students, students with disabilities, students who speak a language other than English and have characteristics of dyslexia. This bill does provide significantly more funding for those students and the commensurate supports they would receive in their public school systems.
Representative Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my first question, I want to refer back to my colleague who asked if what he asked was, were charter schools funded first? He didn't ask if they were funded differently. He asked if monies for charter schools came out first, is my question. And I don't think you answered specifically that question.
You're recognized.
So there is no first or last. There is funding that is generated for public schools, and those schools generate the funding for the students who are enrolled and attend there. That funding is then distributed 10 times per year for traditional funding, and then 5 times per year if you're a fast growth district.
Representative Johnson, follow up.
I've heard that this formula is based on similar student formulas in Florida and Texas. Is that true?
You're recognized.
I'm sorry, sir. So no, this is a student-based formula. 39 states have it. We have referenced a number of states, including Texas, Florida, Indiana, Maryland, et cetera. So this was written specifically in Tennessee and for Tennessee, but I will acknowledge that there are 39 other states who currently use this formula in a variety of different places across the country.
Representative Johnson, follow up.
Well, it's fairly close to Florida and Texas. And are you aware that both Florida and Texas are pay more than 50% locally into the education, that right now Tennessee is paying only 40% locally, and Florida is paying over 50.2, and Texas is paying 54% right now.
You're recognized.
So I would disagree that Florida and Texas are similar to our bills. I was in Texas when that bill was written, and I do not actually think that they are comparable. I think they're very different from each other. And yes, they have different fiscal capacity modeling and calculations. So that would be specific to those states' priorities and needs. And we certainly have a proposal in our state.
Follow up, Representative Johnson.
It's also important to note that Florida is ranked 50th in teacher pay. And I feel that we're slipping in the wrong direction there. But also, when you get back to, someone asked, does it promote vouchers? This legislation may not promote vouchers or promote charters, but what it does with the weighted formula, the kids that are typically targeted for charters and vouchers are going to be carrying a whole lot more dollars with them to those charter schools or private schools because of the weights. I think the weights are not necessarily a bad thing. There are things about the weights that are good. But what we're doing is we're going to be heavily weighting and sending vast amounts of these dollars to inferior charter schools in Tennessee. I mean, that's a fact. They are inferior.
Representative Johnson, your opinion on whether these schools are inferior or not is out of order. Would you like to rephrase your question?
I would say based on the state data, we have over 100 charter schools. 38% perform in the bottom 5% of success, 77 perform in the bottom 10%, and only 5 is, according to state data, are above 20%. So in my view, I think it's important that we're spending our money in our traditional public schools.
Department, you're recognized.
So I can appreciate on policies related to school choice, appreciate your perspective on that. I think as it relates to school funding, the school funding, whenever you increase funding for public schools, and that is the same for the BEP. Any school funding model where you increase funding, yes, students will have more dollars associated with them for their specific needs. In this case, and what is being built under TISA that you all are considering, I think it's really important and a very good thing that students who need more supports would be funded for those commensurate services. I think that's one of the nicer parts of the bill.
Representative Johnson, final follow up. We have other people on the list.
I do think that part of the certain things in the weights are good, and it's a good direction. I absolutely agree with you there. My concern is when it's not going, when the monies aren't going to traditional public schools and they're going to charters or vouchers. That's where I have the concern.
Department, do you have any comment?
No, I think the only comment I would say is that public charter schools would be included in this, but just to reiterate, I know there was a question earlier on that. Private schools are not included in TISA, and there is not a part in this bill that would include private schools. So I appreciate the question.
Chair Lady Littleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, for years, or since I've been here, we vote and we think we're sending teachers raises, and it never gets to or doesn't always get to the teachers. So, and I'm calling the formula a pyramid. So if we request that the teachers get a certain raise, will they get the raise, or how will that be in the formula?
You're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So in the formula, if you all, let's say, want to increase teacher salaries by $100 million, or this year, I think the proposal is $125 million, then you would state that that would be funding that would have to go to existing educator salaries, meaning it doesn't go into a pot with a lot of flexibility. It has to go to increasing salaries of existing educators. The other thing that it does is it ensures that the minimum salary amount for educators through the state board would have to be increased by the proportional amount that you add to the formula. So that allows for, I think, a more direct and frankly certain way of ensuring that that funding goes directly to teacher pocketbooks.
Follow up, Chair Lely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And can you define educators?
You're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So educators in the current definition is essentially anyone who's evaluated under our current TEAMS rubric. So those are school site personnel that provide most of their daily hours in direct services to student. We believe that when you have that as part of the evaluation system, it's the easiest way and frankly the most auditable way to ensure that it's those folks who are providing services to students in school buildings that would be eligible for those increases.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so define the educators. Who would actually get the raise? Would that be like the principals, assistant principals, or would it be director of schools? In the formula, who would that affect, please?
You're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So that would be your classroom teachers, counselors, librarians, in many cases, your assistant principals and principals. It can also be special education teachers, but it would all be school site personnel. I think when you look at anyone who has a credential or certificate in Tennessee, that does include directors of schools. Frankly, I'm in that number. This is really about ensuring it's school-based personnel who are doing direct services to students. So those would be eligible, but those are the types of jobs that would be included.
Final follow-up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my last question is, who decides on the starting pay of teachers? Each county seems to have different, and some of them are, well, of course, they're 95 counties, or I don't know how many districts, but 95 counties. So how does that affect the starting pay for new teachers now within TISA?
You're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So right now, the State Board of Education will determine the minimum salary for any teacher in the state. Many of our districts will actually set that minimum salary to be higher. So right now we're at $38,000. We expect that this July that will bump to $40,000. That's what the department and the state board had publicly discussed last year. We put a pause because of the pandemic. We expect that if for every 100 million approximately that the General Assembly adds, it would increase that minimum salary by about $1,000. And again, that's the statewide minimum. For many of our districts who have a higher minimum than that, they would also be able to increase that minimum commensurate with any additional funds that you all put in. Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Dixie, you're recognized. I'm sorry, I'm out of order. Forgive me. Chairman Byrd, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. Number one, on teachers' benefits. Does this formula, does it also help pay for teachers' benefits such as health insurance?
You're recognized.
Yes, sir. So benefits and all of the things that come with that would also be part of what is funded in this formula.
And what is the teacher's benefit percentage as far as health insurance?
You're recognized.
So I will turn it over to Mary Ann, who can talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Again, please give us your full name and your position in your organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mary Ann Dursky, CFO. Currently in the BEP, we have a unit cost for insurance, which is an aggregate average of all of the premiums statewide that are paid by members of the state teachers insurance pool.
Chairman Byrd.
And what is that averages out for each teacher?
You're recognized.
Thank you. The average that is funded in the formula is approximately $8,000 per teacher.
Chairman Byrd, follow up.
I'm talking about percentage wise.
You're recognized.
Thank you. As a percentage of what, if I
Well,
might ask?
right now, the state pays 45% of teachers' insurance, health insurance.
You're recognized.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. The BEP formula is set to ensure that 45% of that aggregate average is included for every position generated by the BEP.
So the insurance benefits hadn't really gone up any.
You're recognized.
As far as the state mandate, know that it is still in Tennessee code and in the insurance or in the appropriations bill annually that districts must pay 45% of the teachers' insurance premium. Many districts choose to pay more than that. but that is a local decision.
Okay, Chair's privilege here for clarification. The bill before us, the TISA bill, does not change anything that is in code for this insurance that is going on right now and will not change it. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, Mr.
Chairman
Chairman.
Byrd, do you have a call?
Yes, one of my other questions. I know every time that we talked about fully funding the BEP, that really never was true because every school district has several teachers that wasn't included in the BEP formula because of scheduling or whatever, they had to have extra teachers. And does this TISA, does it pay for every teacher far as that's teaching in that school district? Or is it like the BEP, it's just calculates the number of students and then y'all check and see how many teachers are supposed to be with those number of students?
Department, you recognize.
Yes, sir. So I think with the BEP, you're right. There is a BEP funded number of teachers, and many of our districts hire and staff above that minimum number that's funded in the BEP. Under TISA, it is much more flexible. So it is funded to ensure that every grade level, regardless of whether you're in kindergarten or in 11th grade, has that 1-to-20 ratio. It also provides an additional $1 billion for additional staff that districts might currently hire or may need to hire, whether that's counselors, smaller class sizes that might be in districts that are particularly rural, where they have 16 or 17 students, even though it's 1-to-20, because their schools are so far away, it doesn't make sense to consolidate, right? So they're still having to pay for the cost of a full teacher,
Right.
even though there aren't 20 kids in that classroom. And I know you know that well. And
Yes.
so one of the things that the additional $1 billion does provide is additional funding to help support some of those particular needs. And I would say in particular, sparsity, that 5% additional weight for sparsity is really important for many of our school districts because it accounts for things like transportation as well as some of those class size differences that you might see in particularly rural communities.
Chairman
Okay.
Byrd, final
Thank
follow-up,
you.
please.
Appreciate it. That's it.
Chairman Dixie, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just got a couple of questions, 3 maybe. Quickly, you referenced earlier, do we know what the number of school-based personnel is?
Department, you recognize.
I turned off my mic. Apologies. So we have a good sense of how many school-based personnel. I'll turn it over to Marianne in terms of what we see in the BEP in particular, but
Again, give us your name and position before you answer.
Thank you. Marianne Dursky, CFO of the department. Thank you. Currently, there are approximately 66,000 classroom teachers. And then there are additional, of course, licensed personnel and instructional personnel. But in classroom teachers, we are at about 66,000, not all of whom are funded through the BEP.
Follow-up, Chairman Dixie.
So that number would increase if we're talking about all personnel, school-based personnel, when we talk about raises.
You recognized.
As the bill is written, any funding that you designate for raises for instructional personnel would go to those personnel in a school school site that are evaluated by the team's evaluation.
Chairman Dixie.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I kind of want to switch to another question. And this is about the economically disadvantaged and the concentration of poverty. And I think we talked about this earlier. How comfortable are you that we're capturing all of the students that would fall in this category, that is a good milestone that we need to use as a measurement to make sure that we're capturing all the kids, that none are slipping through the cracks?
You recognize, Department.
So I think I would probably ask for a clarification in terms of kind of what is the definition that you're basing off, and then I can say how many of those kids are. I would say just for foundational sake, in the economically disadvantaged category, it does include those students who are what we would have maybe said more likened to free under the FRPL model, students who are homeless, foster, runaway, migrant. All of those students are captured in economically disadvantaged. It allows for that pretty significant weight when you compare the weight percentage that we're proposing compared to what you see in other states. We also have that concentration of poverty indicator. The number of students who are captured in concentration of poverty is commensurate or proportionally the same as it was in 2016 when the state made the change from FRPL to the current at-risk definition. So it's just over 2/3 of the students are captured in concentration of poverty.
Chairman Dixie, follow up.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I guess you answered my question, but I think that's what I was trying to get at is that, and me and Charlie, we talked about this earlier, Charlie Bufalino, is that I was concerned that there are going to be some parents who may not complete the information or the package required for this. And I just wanted to make sure that none are getting left out, because I know sometimes you have proud parents that may not want to feel like they're depending on the government for something, but there are some that know for a fact they will make sure their children are covered under insurance. And I just want to make sure there was some sort of mechanism to make sure, like, I didn't know if using the children on the TennCare rolls would be something in addition to make sure that we're counting and capturing all of our children in this.
Department comment.
So I would say two things in response to that, sir. I think first and foremost is when you look at the concentration of poverty, just to be clear, that is about where that child goes to school and is it a Title I eligible school. You might have a student who is maybe under the free and reduced price lunch model, might be a reduced price student who is not going to a Title I school. That being said, right now, the federal government has not yet determined a consistent way of using Medicaid or Medicare type programs for direct certification. They have a couple of pilots. They are in their third cohort of a pilot to determine how you would transfer a medical-based program into a school funding program. But states are taking that very slowly. What I would encourage is that there's additional conversation and studying that through a pilot program. And again, the federal government is going through that piloting process right now. They have not yet determined the most appropriate way to do direct certification for every state, in the same way that we do for SNAP or TANF or something like that.
Thank you. Chairman Calvi, you're recognized. The question's been called.
We are not in session. We have to go back.
I'm sorry. Hold your motion. Any objections to going back in session? Seeing none. Now, Chairman Calvi, you're recognized. We're in session. Question has been called. Any objection to? I see 3 hands. We are voting on a previous question. All in favor of previous questions indicate by saying aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it. We're now voting on sending. Oh, forgive me, Mr. Sponsor. Do you have any closing comments?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion. And my only closing comment is I just think this is a formula where our leadership and it gives lots of flexibility to our school leaders, and the funding model is going to make changes that we have not been able to do under the current model. So with that, I appreciate it, and I renew the motion.
Thank you, members. We're voting on a positive recommendation and sending this bill to Finance, Ways and Means. All in favor of a positive recommendation for House Bill 2143 indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay.
No.
Ayes have it. Bill moves out to Finance, Ways and Means. Thank you. Members,
Thank you, committee.
We are now back on our regular calendar. Item number 1 by Chairman Kumar, House Bill 2850. Do I have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Chairman Kumar, I show you have an amendment traveling with the bill. No action is needed, but the
Thank you so much.
okay. I show your bill traveling with an amendment code 16859. Is that correct, sir? The amendments are, I'm sorry, wrong bill, disregard.
I have 16838.
You have a proposed amendment, and let me see. Okay, I show an amendment traveling with your bill 16774. Is that correct, sir?
No, sir, I have 16838.
That's your proposed amendment. I show an amendment already on your bill, sir.
Okay.
Is that the correct number, 16774?
Yes, sir.
All right, no action is required on that. And I indicate you have a proposed amendment to be put on this committee, drafting code 16838. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do we have a motion on the amendment? We have a second. We have a motion and a second on the amendment. You're recognized on your amendment, sir. Does it rewrite the bill?
Yes, sir.
All right, members, we will get this in the proper posture. We'll add this to the bill before we discuss it. All in favor of adding amendment number 2838 to the bill indicate by saying aye. All opposed, nay. Ayes have it. The amendment is on the bill. Now you're cleared to explain your bill as amended, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And members, since we have constitutional carry as legislatively passed, it took away the requirement for purchase of guns to take a gun safety course. And as you know, and we realize that gun safety courses are important and there are people who certainly need it. This bill incentivizes purchasers of guns or other citizens to take a gun safety course by making a contribution towards the cost of the course. Under this bill, for each gun safety course conducted by an institution or gun safety school that is approved by the Department of Homeland Security, the state will pay $30 and the person taking the course will make a small copay. And this will encourage people to take gun safety courses, and we think it'll be a safer environment. With that, Mr. Chairman, I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My
Thank
mic
you,
is
sponsor.
malfunctioning here. You recognize Chairman Lafferty.
Oh, thank you. I was curious, was there any conversation about the idea that the people providing these courses might raise their prices commensurate with the $30 enticement that people would be receiving to take the courses?
You recognize Chairman Kumar?
Yes, sir. What we did was that there will be signs displayed in each of the places that sell firearms, federally licensed stores. There will be a sign that will say the state will pay so much. Underneath, it will also state that your cost will be so much, so that people who know what normally the gun safety course used to cost will realize that the cost has gone up or not. But no, we did not try to restrict the providers of these courses, but it will be openly displayed so that any increase in prices will be known to the public.
Follow up, sir.
And along those lines, I saw where it mentioned a report as to how many safety courses will be taken advantage of through this program. Are there historical numbers that show a percentage of safety gun courses taken before this came into being? Do we know currently how many people a year buy a gun? What percentage of those people that buy a gun take a gun safety course?
Chairman Kumar, you recognized?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know how many people purchase guns and how many of, but I do not have the number of how many gun safety courses are provided on a yearly basis. Generally, those are provided in relation to a carry permit. So I think that information should be available. I don't see the department here to answer that, but I don't have the exact number. I can get it to you.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman Warner, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understood you right, the state was going to pay this $30. Is that correct?
You recognize, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and it would be totally voluntary?
You recognize, sir?
Yes, sir. A gun purchase or any other efforts or a registration for a carry permit are not required.
Follow up, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions of our sponsor? Members, we have the amendment before us. We're voting to put the amendment on the bill as explained. Pardon me. We put the amendment on the bill. We're voting to get the bill out to Finance, Ways and Means. If I got that right? Nope. Yep. Finance, Ways and Means. All in favor of sending out House Bill 2850 with a positive recommendation to Finance, Ways and Means indicate by saying aye. All opposed, nay. No. Ayes have it. Bill moves out to Finance, Ways and Means.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
Representative Stewart, you recognized?
Yeah, I just wanted to observe, we just passed probably the most significant bill before the legislature, major school funding legislation directing billions of dollars out of this committee. Multiple people were on the list to speak. And we just did the public a huge disservice by not actually inquiring into that bill and not asking the sponsor important questions. It's an extraordinary
Point of order has been called, sir. What is your point of order?
That's my point
Thank
of
you, Mr.
order.
Chairman. I understand we've moved on to a different bill, which I'm sure Representative Kumar and his constituents felt was very important, and we have a couple more on the calendar. The bill that was debated, and with all due respect to my friend from Davidson County, has gone through weeks and weeks and literally hundreds of hours of discussion, both in committee and out, and we'll have plenty more opportunity in both finance sub, full, and on the floor, where you'll have every opportunity. But a point of order, sir, is that to go back into debate on a bill that has already progressed merely for political purposes is ridiculous.
Chair rules in favor of the point of order.
Yeah, I was called by name. I'd like to respond.
You referred to as a friend from Davidson County, sir, not by name. The chair will also add that the people who were requested by committee members to come up and talk were allowed to talk. No one else was requested. We're moving on.
I'm not sure what that means. I was certainly on the list. I believe Representative Johnson was on the list.
You did.
Yeah.
You made no request for anyone to speak on the bill other than yourselves. The department was called for by a member of this committee, and they came up and testified. Moving on. Next on the agenda is House Bill 1781. I'll transfer the gavel to Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, we need to reconsider actions on House Bill 1781. It's already been moved out and we need to amend the bill. So I'll entertain a motion to reconsider actions. All in favor of reconsidering action on House Bill 1781, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Chairman Reagan, you're recognized on the amendment for House Bill 1781.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proposed amendment extends the Bureau of TennCare to 2024. And with that explanation, I stand
Do I
ready.
have a motion and second on the amendment? Properly motion and second. Do we have any questions for the sponsor of the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor of putting Amendment 17173 on to House Bill 1781, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. We are back on the bill as amended. Chairman Reagan, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that explanation of that amendment, if I may, call for the question on my own bill.
Question has been called for. Do I have a second? We have a second. All in favor of sending House Bill 1781 to calendar and rules, say aye.
Aye.
Do we have any nays? The ayes have it. You're on the way to calendar rules, sir. Gosh, this feels good. I haven't chaired in like 3 years. Dang, I like this gavel. All right, item number 4, House Bill 1811 by Chairman Reagan, the EMS Board. Chairman Reagan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with the motion and second on this one, this extends the Medical Services Board to 2027. With that explanation, I'll entertain any questions.
Members, you have heard. The question's been called for. All in favor of sending House Bill 1811 to calendar rules, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Ayes have it. You're on the calendar rules. Back to you to adjourn us, sir.
Thank you, members. Any further business to come before the committee? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Non-debatable, we are adjourned.